Hello again, lovely people. Today we're just going to go over a few little fixes and a couple of, dare I call them, bugs, really errors in the schematic, but very minor. Nothing that should cause any damage or really much trouble, but if you are having any slight issues, you'll soon find out why. So firstly, and I'm going to go over to the computer in a bit and show you the schematic and where a couple of glitches were. But we have been having some discussion over on the Discord server about the power that I've set up for this guy. Main reason being is somebody discovered that, probably not unbeknownst to me, but unpaying attention to me, the Mega wants 7 to 9 volts to power it. Okay? And this buck converter that I use in many of my projects, I don't normally use a Mega. I really got into using this guy with the Nova project. So this is up to a 20 volt buck converter. However, it's not a boost converter. So that was a little deceiving, and not that I had planned to run it higher than I normally do, which in my case I usually set them for 5.4 volts to power nanos and things, and it does power up the Mega. However, as you've seen in my previous videos, I was having issues with a couple of my pots, as were a couple of other people, and through our discussion and testing and trial and error with this guy, we all decided that it's best to just crank it all the way up, max it out, which in my case, what I'm getting out of it is 6.4 volts with 7.4 going into it. And that seems to be enough to keep the Mega running stably and, is that a word? Stably? Probably not. As well as power all the components. Now, I still have the issues with my two pots, but I've come to realize it's a mechanical issue because they're pretty much dead from bottom reading to mid reading. And then suddenly they just jump here, and the other two work fine. So it could be a wiring issue, but I'm pretty sure it's mechanical. So I'm going to ignore that right now. Anyhow, that being said, we are using a 7.4 volt battery, so there was also the discussion of just getting rid of this guy altogether and just run the battery straight into the Mega. And that may not be a bad idea. Just that it's going to run off a dropping voltage, right? As the battery drains from 7.4 to 7.2, so the Mega is going to have to deal with that. And I don't think that would be a problem, but I think it's just better to give it a stable signal. And 6.4, like I said, seems to be enough. We're not running any cameras. Yes, we have two OLEDs and the RGBs, but that's about it. That requires power, so I think we're okay. And then also, for those of you who know, inside of here we also have a 3 volt regulator, which all that does is give us, from the 5 volt regulator, or buck converter I should say, it just regulates a steady 3.3 voltage to our NRF module. So even if we decided to get rid of that, we still could be okay and just split the battery power to go to here and the 3 volt regulator to power the NRF. But I think I'm going to stick with this setup that we have going. There was also talk of using a buck boost converter and bringing it up to 7 volts or so for the Mega, but they were a little pricey. I think I picked up 5 or 10 of these for maybe less than $10, and the buck boost converters are about $10 each. So again, I think we're okay. A couple of people who have tried this already were having issues with their pots, and those issues apparently are gone now, so it could affect responsive of some of the controls, but I personally haven't had any issues with it, and I was running it at 5.4, but I've since boosted mine up to its max, which seems to be in my case 6.4. So yeah, it runs fine, so I'm happy with it regardless, but I just wanted everybody to know that if they do seem to have ill-responding pins or buttons, or the screens maybe are not responding properly or displaying properly, max out your boost converter, buck converter. And to do that, you really don't even have to hook it up to a multimeter, because it does max out at a volt or two under its source. So that potentiometer right there, you just need to crank up all the way, and please be careful, don't over crank it and break it, because then you can just throw this little guy in the trash most likely. The true way to test it though is you need to put a load on the output, so you can get away with just a 2.2K resistor, and then you can power it up with either a battery or a power supply. Just don't push too much current through it if you use the power supply, because obviously you want to simulate the battery that we're going to be using. So yeah, that takes care of that battery issue and the power issue. And I think, like I said, through discussion on Discord, we are settled on keeping this guy in there and just running off the 6.4 volts. Side note, I did play around with the test software on this a little bit, so I get the joysticks on zeroing out now, and I'm just capping out at 255 because for Nova we don't need all that much incremental control there. And like I said, these two guys are still choking on me. As you can see, the line just kicked on now, which is not how it should work, and then it's dead here. But if you look at these guys, they work much better. As they should. So, little work to do there, but other than that, all of our other controls are good to go. And yeah, as you saw in my previous video, I have Nova now talking to the remote. Next step is to finish off. I'm going to just basically use up all the PS2 code that I've already written and map that out to the controls on this. And once that's going, you know, she'll be back on the ground doing everything she was doing prior to me taking her apart the last time and killing that PS2 remote and all the fun changes we've done over the past couple of months. So from there, guys, yeah, we should be in the home stretch. I am definitely going to reach out to a lot of you, especially on Discord, and get some feedback on walking gates when we start passing around code for that. So I welcome any ideas, suggestions, and let's just not get carried away on hardware, because I believe, at least in my case, this will be the end of Nova's hardware for me. From here on, it's software. Okay, so I wanted to talk about addressing, literally, the OLEDs. I mentioned it in a previous video, but somebody asked me to go in a little deeper for those of you who aren't familiar, and I didn't go into detail in that last video. So yes, with your OLEDs out of the box, unfortunately, they're on the same address. Now, I found that out the hard way, and I guess that's the beauty of being the pioneer of these projects, is I make the mistakes that hopefully I don't pass on to you guys. Not a critical mistake. I just wired them both up, plugged them into my microcontroller, sent a little code to each one of them saying something different on each screen, and lo and behold, they both displayed what code I sent to this guy. That told me immediately that they were on the same address on the bus, so the data just went straight from this one right to that one, thinking they were both not necessarily the same device, but yes, you can have multiple devices on the same address, you'll just get the same data. So, that being said, we need to change the address on one of the two OLEDs. Now, unfortunately, this guy here, to my knowledge at least, you cannot change the address. You may be able to do it in some low-level software, but there's no jumper, so throw that one aside. This is the guy you want to change the address on, because you will see right on the back of it, it says address select. And what it's referring to, well, this camera's pretty good. Jeez, I was going to use my microscope. I guess we don't even need to. Although, can he hold it straight enough and focus? So you can see there it says address select. That little resistor. Yeah, let's put this under the microscope, guys. Probably making you dizzy right now. So while we're on the topic, this thing was like 50 bucks, I think. If that. So it's a cheap little microscope. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. You're actually looking at brushed aluminum right there, and that's how well it's magnifying. And there's my soldering tip. So it's pretty cool. Great investment, guys, for the money. So let's go in here and look at what I was just trying to show you. So you can see there, that little resistor across those two pads sets this guy for that address right there, by default out of the box, like I said. And that other OLED is also set on that address. But if you heat up that resistor and then scooch it over to the other pad and the middle pad that it's on now, so scooch it over to here, Then you will change the address to this address. And then your OLEDs will be on different addresses. And then in the code that I have written for the remote, yes, it's already set to use this address here, so you should be good to go. Otherwise, it's very simple enough to enter the other address in case the OLEDs you buy may not be the same ones that I bought, and you may have different addresses. You may not even have the conflict of the two OLEDs on the same address. So this is just for those of us that did and will. That's how you do it. It's pretty simple. And I assume that there are other boards out there and sensors and such where the same thing will apply. Some of them do have jumpers. Some of them just have multiple pads that you solder together as a jumper. And then, yes, I've seen a lot with a resistor you actually have to move. Okay, so yeah, that's addressing the OLEDs.
Okay, so the couple of wiring diagrams errors that I made. Number one was when I added the voltage regulator, I just did it really quick and wasn't paying attention, and I actually had this resistor on the wrong side over here, which, yeah, was not doing much. So hopefully not many of you wired it up like that way, or caught it before you did, or didn't power it for very long, because this was actually sending, I believe, 7.2 volts to your pin headers on your Mega, which is bad news. If you did blow out a Mega, please let me know, and I actually will happily reimburse you for my screw up. I've made several mistakes over the past few months with this project, pretty silly mistakes like this one. Luckily at no cost to me, and then nobody's really told me it was at cost to them yet, but like I said, if I caused you frustration or anger or money, please let me know, and I'll make it up to you one way or another. Nextly, the joysticks. So you'll see what I mean when you start to put this thing together. The joysticks go in backwards and inversed and mirror imaged of each other, so it's no surprise to me that I did screw this up as well. And then to top that off, the numbering of these pins on these symbols I almost never pay attention to or use for any purpose. They just come in with the symbol and I just go ahead and wire it. That was probably a fail of mine as well. As you can see, the ground and 5 volt are reversed mirror image of each other between the two joysticks. And then the middle pin I clearly couldn't go wrong with, but lo and behold, like a dumbass, I had the X-axis of the joysticks wired to the select buttons rather than the X-axis. So that is now fixed. What you're looking at here is correct, and what diagram is on GitHub is correct. But if you have the older one, please be aware. And now, I didn't label them here, but obviously a couple of keen fellows in the community and misses in the community did notice by tracing back to the actual pins. They immediately thought that I messed up the pin numbering, to which I looked in the code and said, no, I did not. And then they came back and caught me and said, well, Chris, then you messed up the wiring. And that I did. So thanks out to them. And for all the help of everybody on Discord. There's some great stuff going on there. There's a new overall wiring diagram, schematic / pictogram being put together for Nova that I think a lot of you are really going to like. And yeah, so those are my fixes for the wire diagram. Again, nothing too crucial except that voltage regulator. And even that, I don't think 7 volts would kill your Mega that quickly or at all. So hopefully none of you had any problem with that. Okay, and then next and lastly, what I want to talk about is a little bit of code. I'm not going to show too much here, but I definitely want to discuss some things. And rather than looking at my ugly mug, I figure we'll look at some code. So 2 things. Before we look at this, which is the remote code, where it's at now, I have released on Discord to a couple of people who got as far as connecting their NRF modules to both Nova and their remote. I gave them some test code that you can install on the remote and on Nova to test the NRF communication between the two. And I talked about this in a previous video where you have to use 2 separate instances of the IDE, and it is a bit of a cumbersome. You must follow certain steps when booting each device and starting each device, and which the receiver or the transmitter talks first or loads first. I have found that only one specific sequence works for me. If you happen to change that sequence, or if I happen to change my sequence, my teensy circuit goes dead with the serial communication, and I have to reboot everything, including my laptop, because it just kills the port. And yeah, it really, in my opinion, is because we're running 2 versions of the IDE open at once, connecting to 2 different serial ports, which Windows 10 at least creates on the fly. So I can see, and let's all face it, Windows 10 isn't the greatest with ports. And for those of you who are old enough to remember the days of IRQs and setting up our own COM ports just to get a printer connected or a modem, God love them. Anyway, so yeah, that all being said, you may have a different sequence that works for you. If you pop onto Discord, it's being shared there on what works for everybody else, because everybody seems to be having a different issue here or there to get them to talk to each other through the serial code. Because I can tell you, once I've got it all working and unplugged my devices from the laptop and the IDE and those serial ports, Nova and the remote talk to each other every single time. I've not had a single issue, not had to reboot anything. So I almost know for a fact our issue here is, the IDE / COM ports / operating system. Okay, so that being said, I will put a link to the description below to the test code for both the transmitter and the receiver, which obviously in this case, the remote is our transmitter and Nova is the receiver. And we'll put that up on GitHub so you can use that if you get that far. In the meantime, here is the raw Nova remote code. And what I wanted to talk about in here is, so in my case, while I was putting together the remote, as those of you who know who are diving into doing that now, it's quite a tedious wiring project, to say the least. And no surprise if you flip-flop a couple of wires that you didn't mean to, especially amongst the same component. And what I mean by that is we have 4 pot sliders. It's very easy to screw up the order of those 4 wires and mix them up with the 4 pins that they use. So what I want to do here is, just for the novices out there at least, is show you that if that so happens, don't worry about reopening your remote and having to rewire things. In most cases, you can just change your local pin numbers and you should be okay. So the way I numbered things, I think I've showed before, and I guess I can illustrate it here, is I go 1 being the outside, 2 being the outside, 3 being the inside, 4 being the inside. That's how I count things with the remote control, at least. Okay, so that, having said that, you can see that pin 1 and pin 2 are adjacent pins. I'm sorry, pot 1 and pot 2 are adjacent pins. So don't let that confuse you, because it may. Really, this is the left outermost pot and this is the right outermost pot. So be careful of that. But again, if you happen to mess that up, you can very easily just change this to pin 10 if you wanted to, and the other pin 10 to pin 9, or whatever you mix up. Because I did do it for the buttons, as you can see right here, 3, 5, 4, 6. Oops, that used to say 3, 4, 5, and 6, but Chris messed up wiring a couple of my buttons, so I just changed the order of the pins there. Not a big deal. Now, the only time that's going to hurt you is if you don't remember to do it and you upgrade your software along with the changes that I'll be making to this software, because it'll overwrite your pin definitions each time. So keep that in mind. I may actually pull all that out into a configuration file, only specifically because, yes, this is such a tedious project. I'd be surprised if nobody else, if anybody got it straight without crossing at least one of the pins for a switch or a pot. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised. You guys are pretty awesome out there. As you all know, I'm a 2-3 year hobbyist in this trade, and some of you are professionals, so I highly doubt you'll all make the mistake, but I did. Okay, so yeah, that's all I wanted to show you in the software here, guys. Right now, I'm just, yes, like I said in previous segment there, is coding up the transmission of the data from all the controls to Nova so that I can replace the PS2 controls that are in there. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in my previous video, but I did talk about it in Discord with a few of you guys. I did attempt to keep our PS2 code in Nova and just let you guys comment out a few lines for if and when you did upgrade to the NRF, but it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do that too easily, and I don't think it's worth the effort. So unfortunately, for those of you who are going to keep the PS2 remote and not do the new NRF remote, hopefully you know how to code a little bit, and really you should just have to clip out the PS2 function and put it in any new code versions that I pass along. As you've seen in all of my code that I write with little hardware devices, there are always these active switches. So I'll keep the PS2 active switch there alongside the NRF. So those of you keeping the PS2, like I said, you'll just have to put the function back in the code and then disable NRF and enable your PS2, and it should be good to go. So it won't be much effort, but yeah, I'm not going to try and maintain the code for that because honestly, I've had my fill of that remote. I used it on my Hexapod project and had troubles with it there, and I should have known better to even use it on Nova, but I did anyway. But now we don't have to anymore because we have our cool new remote.
All right, guys. So yeah, that's all I have to talk about today. I will be back as soon as possible. I do not think I have much going on this weekend, so maybe I will get some time to put some serious code to finish up the remote, and then we can move on to walking gates. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.